Of Psalm 62. We're studying verse 10 today, which says, "Put no trust in extortion. Set no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart on them." So we return to this idea of trust. And David has just encouraged us in verse 8 to trust in God alone and to trust in Him at all times. And so what that doesn't answer is the question that we started addressing in verse 9 is anything else or anyone else worth replacing or adding to God as our hope, right? Is there anything else that we can trust? Because it's difficult to trust an invisible God aside from anything else. And so in verse 9, he kind of tore down the idea that people could be as sufficient as a trust as God. In fact, that they are just light and kind of empty as a hope for our salvation or as a source of salvation. And here in verse 10, he's going to address something else that's kind of near and dear to our hearts, and that's treasure, right? Riches. Because that can be another thing that we tend to pursue as our hope instead of God. And so what he does here is let's look at the three things that he kind of calls out as things that we shouldn't trust, right? He says, put no trust in extortion, and then set no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart on them. So those three things: extortion, robbery, riches. Okay, so that might be a helpful way to remember it. If you do put your trust in these things, then you will err, right? Extortion, robbery, riches. Extortion would be like using your power or your position to manipulate others or get gain from them. And then robbery would be like using your strength or your power to manipulate other people to get something from them. And the result of both of those things is riches, right? So he's not actually saying that you should trust in like the system of extortion or trust in the process of robbery, but actually the result of them, right? So the result of both of those things is riches. So that's kind of what he's given us three negative exhortations. Let's take a little bit closer look at those three exhortations. He says, no trust, right? No vain hopes, and set not your heart are kind of our three exhortations from them. Again, all negative commands. And so this first one kind of takes us back to verse 8, right? Where he says, trust in Him at all times, all you peoples. And then the second one, no vain hopes, is the the same root word as these other two, which is hevel, right? And the picture here is that it's an empty hope. It's possible for us to put our hope in something, right? You often hear people just say, well, just you have no hope, right? But if you can have hope in the wrong things, I think this is kind of intuitive to all of us, particularly when it comes to relationships. We've all invested in someone or trusted someone that at the end of the day kind of let us down, and it ended up being an empty hope, right? And kind of an empty relationship. And what he's saying here is that this is true too of finances or of money or of treasure. He's saying if you hope in it, then it will be an empty hope. Like treasure doesn't care about you. Treasure is a poor substitute for God, especially as we've seen in Ecclesiastes, because it can come and go at any time, and it's impersonal. It cares little for you, and it's kind of at the whim of, as Ecclesiastes will say, time and chance, right? Time and chance kind of happen to everyone. And so treasure comes and goes, and it's not very reliable. And then in this final line, if riches increase, set not your heart on them. And I love to hear that he draws in our hearts as kind of a key player, I guess, in what we set our affections on. And he says, even if things are going well, like even if riches do increase, which may happen, which would be great. Like riches solve a lot of like a wide variety of problems. They function as like a shade and a shadow to us. They help protect us from difficult things. But if they go well, like if riches increase, even still, don't set your heart on them. Like, do not rest in them as your hope. Again, because they are impersonal. Like, they don't care about you. And hoping in them is vanity. So he's still shoring up his argument that there is only one source and one foundation, one future for life, and that is God alone. Going back to that key word, God alone is the only one that we can put our refuge in. And he's going to argue that in verse 11 again. Once God has spoken, twice have I heard this: power belongs to God. So I encourage you to continue, honestly, just think through this. Reflect on in your own heart. What are things that you tend to trust? What are the things that you run to in difficulty? And does Solomon address some of them here? Like, is it people? Is it stuff? Is it treasure? Is it something else? There could be a long list of other things that our hearts tend to cling to in trial as a substitute for the only one we should be resting in, which is the divine, the invisible God, who's sovereign over our lives. So I'd encourage you to reflect on this today. Say verse 10 25 times, verse 9, go back to 20 times, 8, 15, and so on, back down to 5 times. And I just encourage you to review on these truths, and I pray that your heart will be encouraged as you do so.